right now, you've got military leaders around the world trying to turn down the temperature a little bit, with the Secretary of Defense and NATO officials saying that explosion in Poland was not a deliberate attack by Russia, even though they say it's still Moscow's fault things are blowing up in the first place. We're getting you some answers. Plus, breaking in the last hour, the Senate clearing a key hurdle for a potentially groundbreaking LGBTQ plus rights bill with new federal protections for same-sex and interracial marriages on the horizon. A look at how we got to this moment. And Elon Musk on the stand today saying he deserves the billions of dollars he's getting from Tesla, as he's also trying to take a step back from all of his companies, including Twitter, while telling workers there they got to get extremely hardcore or get out. We've got to look at that. Plus, in tonight's original, we're getting into the nationwide shortage of a super important drug used to treat infections like you might get on the reg. And in our backstory, the man in charge of taking care of the most famous Christmas tree in America, Rockefeller Center's top gardener, takes us behind the scenes on just how to pick the perfect tree. That's coming up later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight we're coming on the air with some answers about that explosion in Poland that killed 2 people. And let's be real, we're coming on the air with world leaders breathing a sigh of relief that it was not, they say, a Russian missile to blame for that explosion, something that could have dragged the West into a direct conflict with Moscow. Instead, they say it was basically an accident involving a Ukrainian air defense missile. And that is seriously easing the panic of the last 24 hours, when the list of what we did not know was a lot longer than what we did know. Today, the Secretary of Defense says even though the strike, it seems, was not deliberate, Russia should still get the ultimate blame. Listen.
This explosion was most likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. The world knows that Russia bears ultimate responsibility for this incident.
This comes after what we heard today from leaders, including President Biden, who, while still in Bali, called for today's emergency meeting of allies, saying it was unlikely this was a Russian explosion. As for Russia today, well, they're kind of saying, I told you so. In a new statement, you've got the foreign ministry condemning NATO's initial reaction to the explosion, calling it outrageous, and that it happened without the desire to understand the situation. So now comes the investigation to get an even clearer picture of what really happened. You see this on screen here? Polish police putting out this photo of crew members already at the scene near some of this debris, what looks like that a huge crater. The U.S. has pledged its full support, with Kyiv saying they're ready to see what the allies can figure out. Rob Sanchez is joining us now. Rob, today we heard Secretary Milley, Defense Secretary Austin call this a war of choice, basically saying, hey, even though this missile didn't come from Russia, Moscow is still at fault for basically starting this war in the first place.
Yeah, Hallie, this is a consistent message that we've heard from Washington, from Warsaw, and from NATO leadership here in Brussels, that this was a Ukrainian missile that caused this explosion in Poland, but this is ultimately Russia's fault. Russia bears moral responsibility here, because the only reason there are missiles flying over the skies of Europe in 2022 is because Vladimir Putin made this decision to go ahead and invade Ukraine. It's a situation where everyone is pointing the finger there, saying the same thing here. The Russians, as you can imagine, are furious about this. They're saying we're being blamed for 2 deaths caused by the Ukrainians. They summoned the Polish ambassador in Moscow for a kind of diplomatic dressing down earlier. Hallie, a little awkwardly on the diplomatic front, the Western allies are saying to Ukraine, listen, this was your missile, it wasn't your fault. The Ukrainians are saying, we don't accept this was our missile. Even in the last couple of hours, President Zelensky has said they do not believe that it was a Ukrainian missile that caused this explosion. It's not clear what level of evidence the Ukrainians need to accept that. One thing they have suggested is that possibly Ukrainian forensic investigators will join American and Polish teams in actually looking at the impact site. Hallie?
You've got the Polish president saying that President Biden will be sending in U.S. experts to help in investigating. And bigger picture, you know, Russia and NATO have managed to avoid direct confrontation with each other since this war started here. This explosion, right? And now again, I mean, I think about, Raph, we came on the air last night and we were like, hey, we want to be really transparent. We don't have a lot of answers here. We now have more of those answers because NATO and Poland and the U.S. has more of those answers, right? It does put a real spotlight on the risks here that Russia is taking by continuing to perpetuate this war in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are kind of two ways of looking at this. One, as you said, this underscores the incredible danger of having a shooting war in Ukraine with 4 NATO allies along Ukraine's borders, the real risk that fighting in Ukraine won't stop in Ukraine, that sooner or later something is going to go wrong, even if it didn't last night, and you will end up with the NATO military alliance drawn into conflict with Russia. Hallie, a slightly more optimistic version of this is that actually cool heads basically prevailed here, and that neither the Russian side nor the NATO side rushed into conflict. There were no one was racing to fire the first shots, even when this explosion happened. So the situation held, but it's, clearly a very volatile one. Hallie?
Yeah, held by but what thread? You know what I mean? Raf Sanchez, thank you very much there in Brussels. We know the UN Security Council meeting today, of course, as well. Here at home, we are looking at a critical piece of breaking news coming out of the Senate, right? Because they have advanced now what could be the most significant gay rights legislation to pass Congress ever. It is narrow, though. Narrow, but important. With 12 Republicans joining Democrats to move forward the Respect for Marriage Act. This is something that would guarantee federal protections for interracial and same-sex marriage. It would not, in fact, codify 2 key Supreme Court cases that would force states to issue licenses for these kinds of marriages, but it would take the Defense of Marriage Act off the books, and it would make states recognize marriages performed in other states. It's something I asked Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth about not too long ago. Listen. How confident are you that this Respect for Marriage bill will actually make it to the president's desk? And secondly, are you satisfied that this bill goes far enough to protect same-sex marriage?
I am very confident that this bill will make it to the president's desk for his signature. The bill is, really more clarification language to make sure that people understand where the law as it stands is. And remember that Obergefell is still the law of the land.
Obergefell, of course, that Supreme Court ruling that protects same-sex marriage. Ryan Nobles is our Capitol Hill correspondent who is joining us now. And Ryan, this is a critical moment, right? This is something that we haven't seen Congress do before. It also is a moment that has come via negotiation, right? And that is why I wanted to ask Senator Duckworth that question. Does it go far enough? Because there are some, I think, folks who might look at this and think, well, wait a second, you could actually put even stronger protections in place. Walk us through the dynamics of this moment, keeping in mind that this all stems from what we heard from at least one Supreme Court justice after Roe v. Wade, which previously had protected abortion rights in this country, was overturned.
Yeah, you're right on a number of points there, Hallie. This isn't necessarily codifying that Supreme Court decision, but it does go a long way to protecting same-sex unions across the country in a way that weren't protected before, should that Supreme Court decision get overturned. And where the compromise was made, as you speak of, was in protecting religious liberties. There are still many religions that don't view same-sex marriage as acceptable in their faiths, and this would protect them from continuing to practice that type of religion. For instance, it protects all religious liberty and conscience protections under the Constitution, puts that under federal law. It allows nonprofit and religious organizations to provide facilities and goods for the celebration of marriage under their terms. The tax-exempt status for religious groups will not be affected by the legislation, and the federal government will also not be required to recognize polygamous marriages. And this all really stems from public opinion, right? It is incredible the difference in public opinion as it relates to same-sex marriage in just over the past 20 years. Back in 1996, when Americans were asked about this question, only 27% supported the idea of same-sex unions. As you go along the path, by 2016, that was up to 60%. And now here we are in 2022, and it is 70% of Americans. Yeah. So that's why you see 12 Republicans feeling comfortable to vote to move this legislation forward. Now, we should point out, Hallie, they still have an exit ramp here. Eventually, there's going to be a vote on the floor, an up or down, yes or no vote, which they'll only need 51 votes for. A lot of these senators could still choose to vote no on the substance of the bill, but taking this procedural step to allow it to get to the floor is still very significant.
Yeah, and that's the thing that allows this thing to move forward in the first place. Okay, so we've talked about sort of the substance of policy that the Senate is taking up right now. Let's talk about the drama that I think a lot of people were following as it relates to who will be in charge of Senate minority Republicans. in the next Congress. It's going to be Mitch McConnell, but he faced a challenge today. He basically fended off this challenge from Florida Senator Rick Scott. 10 Republicans voting against McConnell. The first time he's really faced a challenge like this. Does this change the dynamic in the Republican Party? Keeping in mind, they will not have Senate control. That'll belong to Democrats. But at 50-50 or maybe 51-49, it's going to be tight.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot like it was before, Hallie. And you know, Mitch McConnell told us today that he welcomed the challenge. He said that he wasn't given this job and that it's the ability of the members of his conference to decide whether or not he should have it or not. He said he was very happy getting the 37 votes that he did get. But to your point about what it means for governing in this next Congress, you know, if Republicans want to stop any kind of forward trajectory with the Biden administration, they need to stay unified as a conference. And what Mitch McConnell said he hopes happens in this next Congress is that they work between the 40-yard lines, if you're using a football field as an analogy, and try and find common sense piece of legislation that both Republicans and Democrats can support, and that they can stay unified as a conference and pass that legislation, where in other instances they can stay unified as a conference to block things that they think are too far to the left. You know, whether or not that'll happen remains to be seen. But, you know, given the results of this past election, Hallie, the fact that he was able to hold on to support of his fellow Republicans is notable, because it was not a very good midterms for Republicans in the Senate.
Ryan Nobles, thank you. All of it, by the way, as NBC News still has not projected at this point, 8 days out from Election Day, which party will control the House of Representatives. Republicans have the math. We'll see if we call it sometime in the next 24 hours, fewer, less, who knows, more, maybe. We'll see. Ryan, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Al.
The Respect for Marriage Act is just one of the plans Democrats have in store for a busy next couple of months before they're expected to head into the next session of Congress. We're going to break down what's in the so-called lame duck, meaning the time period between now and the new Congress, tomorrow on the show. Don't miss it. Tonight, we are hearing a chorus of Republicans, people in Donald Trump's own party, who do not want the former president to take a third shot at the White House. Take the people who worked for him, who literally worked for him, like his former defense secretary, Mark Esper, who is crystal clear today. Watch.
I wish he wouldn't. I think he's unfit for office. I thought his remarks were very subdued and uninspiring.
Mr. Trump's former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who, by the way, is being speculated to be thinking about a White House run himself, was needling the former president for claiming victimhood, as Pompeo put it. And then there's Kevin McCarthy, who didn't say much about what he's thinking. Watch.
Endorse President Trump.
Why?
No,
what
are you prepared to endorse him?
You guys.
Like, honestly, I read that as Kevin McCarthy just exasperated that he has to get this question in the first place in November of 2022. Same kind of vibes from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who got a similar question on 2024. Watch.
We just finished this election, okay? People just need to chill out a little bit on some of this stuff. I mean, seriously.
All of it against the backdrop of a potential money problem for Mr. Trump, because he may have to kind of start over on fundraising, or at least make some moves, since federal rules will not let him directly touch the roughly $100 million he's raised. Vaughn Hilliard is live for us in West Palm Beach, Florida. And by the way, Vaughn, like Governor DeSantis, thought to be mulling his own 2024 run, but is telling everybody, hey, chill, like take a deep breath. Sure. It's all coming as we're hearing now.
I think we'd all be okay with a little chill ourselves.
I could use some chill. We could all use a little chill at the moment. You know who's not chill? Some of these donors, right, in the eyes of former President Trump, because we are now hearing of a third huge donor who doesn't want to back a third Trump run. Ronald Lauder, one of the Estee Lauder heirs, telling that to our friends at CNBC. This is somebody who knew former President Trump from college. You had Stephen Schwartzman, big-time donor, too. So you've got people not just in the party, like meaning politicians and leaders, but also the people who fundraise for those politicians and leaders going, well, wait a second, maybe we do need some sort of fresh face here.
Right, and that lack of commitment says a lot, especially in this Republican Party, which has remained consistently loyal outside of that little period after January 6th to Donald Trump here. And when you're talking about donors, the big question is, what impact could they lend some credence to Republican lawmakers to say, hold back a second here? You hear Kevin McCarthy suggesting maybe he'll stay on the sideline here for a moment. You hear Bill Cassidy suggesting that perhaps the party should look in a different direction. Cynthia Lummis, the senator out of Wyoming, suggesting that Ron DeSantis should be the future face of the party. One by one, when you have individuals not not wholly committing to Donald Trump. You are suggesting that perhaps this Republican Party, really for the first time since 2016, is willing to give others a look. The question, though, then turns to who's going to go and fill that void. Would it be a Ron DeSantis, a Glenn Youngkin? Mike Pence released his book yesterday and is out on this book tour here where he's beginning to speak a little bit more openly about his time in the White House. Who would actually be willing to put not only their political capital on the line, but really their political future on the line? Because if you go out and convince donors to give to you once, it would make a future presidential run that much harder.
That's right. There's also the legal investigatory piece. We know that former President Trump is facing a series of investigations against him. What we also know is that the Republican National Committee wouldn't pay more of his legal fees, right, if he does become the candidate, the nominee. There's some discussion that perhaps this announcement by the former president is a way to shield himself from investigations. But I think about what Attorney General Merrick Garland told our own Lester Holt, that he will pursue investigations without fear or favor, pursue justice to where it leads.
Right. Right. The Department of Justice is not going to hold up their investigations or any potential indictments based off of an individual choosing to run for office. And that is where, when you are looking at the likes of Glenn Youngkin, I was talking with somebody close to him earlier today who suggested that, look, he is focused on the Virginia legislative session coming up in January and February. And then you look here in Florida, their legislative session begins in March and April. There is plenty of time for other individuals to see where these next months go for these investigations surrounding Donald Trump. Not only the criminal investigations from the Department of Justice, but also the likes of the civil trial that is set to begin soon in New York, and one in which could potentially financially cripple the Trump family and the Trump organization. There is a lot that gives a reason to these other Republicans who are eyeing a potential run and challenge to Donald Trump, reason to hold off and wait and see how all this plays out legally for Donald Trump first.
Vaughn Hilliard, as the sun is setting there at West Palm Beach. Vaughn, thank you. I hope you do find some chill. Appreciate it. Let's turn to what's happening in the world of tech, because Tesla CEO Elon Musk is saying in court today he doesn't actually want to be the CEO of Tesla or any company, as he's defending his $56 billion pay package from Tesla. That's after shareholders filed a lawsuit that alleged Musk used his dominance on the board to influence Tesla's board of directors to have a say in that big money pay package. Musk is, in fact, the CEO of 3 companies right now, right? Tesla, SpaceX, and now Twitter, which he also said he expects to find somebody else to eventually run, with more and more chaos on that social media platform after Musk gave employees an ultimatum in this email obtained by CNBC, which said they needed to be, I am quoting here, they needed to be extremely hardcore and commit to working long hours at high intensity or else leave the company. They have until tomorrow night to decide. Like, click a button. Are you going to be hardcore or are you going to be without a job? Joining us now is Jake Ward. And Jake, let me take these in a couple of different buckets. Let me start with the court piece of it today, because Musk, is saying in court today, facing this big lawsuit, that the title of CEO isn't really a reflection of what he actually does at his companies. Tell us more about that. Tell us more about what went down in court.
Well, it's important to understand here, Hallie, that nobody in his position gets to that position without having multiple strategies to more or less everything they say. And so as we try to decode, in this case, what he means by it, it seems to suggest a couple of things. So first of all, he's on that stand trying to both defend the process by which he was awarded that $56 billion and also having to explain a little bit about why anyone on this earth would, be worth that amount of money. He made these CEO comments in response to that sort of question. And basically, he said, I am not a CEO. My job is to make technological breakthroughs possible. So in a way, defending his value, but also in another way, trying to perhaps distance himself from the insinuation that he had somehow put some pressure on the board to give him this. He basically said, the board made this decision, they gave it to me, and here is the role I play such that it would actually make some sense. And so him defending his position there. But as you mentioned, these two buckets, they sloshed into each other over and over again in court in Delaware.
Let's talk about this Twitter bucket, because Musk is laying out this Twitter 2.0, where he's talking about this super intense work environment with long hours, or people can quit and be paid for 3 months. I have to tell you, Jake, like, you and I work long hours with high intensity. Do you know what I mean? But it's not because our boss said do it and be hardcore or else you'll get fired. Like, people, on the one hand, I think people are generally intrinsically motivated to work hard, or they can quiet quit. On the other hand, like, devil's advocate, I guess you could argue Musk is just trying to lay out expectations that he only wants high performers. Help us understand this if you can.
You know, it's not at all clear yet. I mean, first of all, I will say, if you came to me in the hall and you said, "Are you ready to go extreme hardcore?" I'd be like, "Yeah, it's Hallie Jackson. She goes extreme hardcore. I mean, I'll go extreme hardcore." Like,
but that's totally different
we know a little bit about that kind of
and I'm paying your salary. Do you know what I mean?
That's
like
right.
You and I being like, "Yeah, let's crush."
That's right, exactly.
Like, that's just
it's
a different
not a collegial thing. This is the thing. I mean, this is a person who is in the ultimate position and has shown that he is willing to fire an enormous number of people, basically willy-nilly as he likes. And so that's right. People basically woke up this morning to this email, basically demanding click here or get fired in 24 hours. We're not even sure if that's really a legally enforceable thing yet. It is a very, very big deal. But we also do know that that's right. This is a person who has made his name creating an incredibly high-functioning engineering culture at the companies he runs. And in his communication to employees, he basically said, we're going to make this mostly an engineering place. This is going to be focused on engineering. And so he wants to make it sort of pared down to that kind of environment. But yeah, is he ready to are people ready to sleep on the floor? Not entirely clear yet, Hallie.
Should we be deleting, like, our Twitters? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the consumer impact on this? And I say consumer, like, most of America is not on Twitter, but if you are, should you care? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the impact on your actual app?
Well, I mean, we should we should sort of remind everybody that, like, Twitter, for all its flaws, really fundamentally serves an irreplaceable purpose right now. I mean, if you're going to find out about a road closure or an evacuation, or if a world leader wants to communicate to another world leader without having to go through official channels, Twitter is how it happens, right? There is no other platform in this world that we depend on quite the same way for communicating and for finding trusted sources as the media. So it is an incredibly important civic piece of infrastructure. And the fact that it seems to be really under threat in all of these different ways is a very, very big deal. The fact that he is now talking about having laid off not only half the full-time staff, but all of the contractors on whom we depend for the content moderation, and now he's saying to everybody else, knuckle up or get out. It is not clear who's going to be left at the end of this, but we do know, and this is an important thing to note here, Hallie, in court today, he said that he believes that the restructuring of Twitter is going to be done by the end of this week. So come hell or high water, he seems to be bent on taking those he doesn't want there out of there by the end of this week, Hallie.
Or come hell and high water. Jake Ward, thank you very much. Appreciate it. NBC News is just getting our hands on this new Senate report that's just out that says a whole lot more has to be done by the biggest tech companies and the government to deal with the threat of domestic extremists. They're talking about companies like Meta, TikTok. They're talking about law enforcement agencies here in this country like the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, basically finding that the business models for a lot of these big tech companies actually incentivize extreme content, and that law enforcement agencies aren't putting in place enough resources to handle that threat. Ken Delanian scooped this story and has more now with us here. Ken, this report also says the FBI and DHS are spending a lot of money on international terrorism, even though they've been saying that domestic terrorism, this kind of, white nationalist extremism here at home, is actually a bigger threat.
That's right. Well, first of all, Hallie, after that last segment, I now understand why I didn't get a response from Twitter's communication department today when I asked them about this story. But yes, you're absolutely correct. This report takes the FBI and DHS to task for devoting more resources to international terrorism, even though for years officials have acknowledged that domestic terrorism is the greater threat. It's killing more Americans. And the report also says that neither agency has a real handle on the extent of the problem. They can't come up with data, for example, for how many attacks were there last year motivated by white supremacist or anti-government ideology. And in fact, what they found was before the January 6th riot, FBI arrests for domestic terrorism were actually in decline, even though the problem was getting worse. Now, obviously, they've made a lot of arrests around the January 6th insurrection, and that's consuming a lot of FBI resources. But this report is saying that the FBI and DHS just need to step up their game. And another example that I found really interesting was they're saying that the Senate report is saying both the FBI and DHS need to do a better job of monitoring open source social media, like the kind of threat information we saw before January 6th, and they didn't act on it because they said it wasn't specific enough. Here's a Democratic senator saying you need to scrutinize what people are saying on social media if they are threatening violence, Hallie.
So, Ken, you haven't heard back from Twitter. What about, like, TikTok or Meta? These companies are not unfamiliar with the concern from government entities. What about, DHS, FBI?
So, yeah, the report says that essentially these four big social media companies, their business model encourages extremist content because it encourages engagement. And often what gets people angry, or the things that people engage with are things that make them angry and get excited. And so what they're saying is, you know, these companies are willing to take content down that violates their rules after it's already spread, but they would like them to take more action on the front end. Now, the companies have replied, most of them, and said, look, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to take down content. And Meta, for example, is saying we think there's less extremist content on our platform. But this Senate report really does say that it believes that there's a huge problem with social media that society has to come to grips with. Unfortunately, Hallie, there don't seem to be any easy answers when we have a First Amendment that guarantees free speech.
Ken Delaney, and thank you. Appreciate you being on top of that for us. Coming up, police in Idaho are getting ready to share more information with reporters about the killings of 4 University of Idaho students. What they're sharing so far about the crime, we're going to have a live report coming up in just a sec. Plus, a big update to a story you heard here first. Why your burger may soon come with lab-grown meat in just a sec. Coming up, why scientists are warning more than 1 billion people might be at risk of losing their hearing. That's coming up in the 5 things. But first, in just a little bit, police in Moscow, Idaho are supposed to be sharing more information with reporters about the killings of 4 University of Idaho students this weekend. No suspects in custody, according to police. We've got the county coroner set to be finishing up the autopsies of those victims today. Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Zana Kernodle, and Madison Mogan were found dead inside an off-campus house around noon on Sunday. Officials say they had been dead for hours by the time police got there, all apparently stabbed to death. Their family members say they are just, as you might imagine, struggling to try to make sense of this.
We're just trying to process it. It's not a call that you think that you're going to have to speak with the funeral home directors and the FBI and have it hit national news.
I mean, it is literally a parent's worst nightmare. Gadi Schwartz is joining us now, and the details here are horrific, Gadi, and kind of mysterious. In other words, like, we don't know a lot about what happened here. The city's mayor has speculated maybe this is a property crime gone wrong, maybe a crime of passion, but police haven't confirmed anything. At this point, a lot of people, including those grieving parents, are still in the dark.
Yeah, Hallie, and that mayor's statement really rattled a lot of nerves in town. And then, Hallie, he had to walk back that statement that he made to the New York Times, saying he really didn't know what happened. Meanwhile, the police haven't said anything beyond what they said days ago when it comes to the suspect or the motive, which is that they don't have anyone in custody, but somehow have reason to believe that the community is not in any imminent danger and that this was an isolated incident. So when this press conference starts in about an hour, you can expect questions from the community asking how the police could give that reassurance if a mass murder still appears to be out there on the loose. The police so far trying to alleviate some of the concerns with that written statement that you just saw, saying, we hear you, we understand your fears, we want you to know that, like you, we've been devastated and distressed by these young lives that were needlessly cut short, but so many questions remain. Hallie?
And I imagine that people in the community are who are not, family members necessarily, but are all struggling with this exact tension that you point out. Person's been on the loose, whoever did this, or people have been on the loose for 3 days, and yet they're supposed to feel safe in their own homes.
Yeah, some people are just getting out of town, saying they feel unsafe. Some professors at the local university have been canceling class. As you can imagine, this is a very confusing time in very concerning times. And we talked to some students around campus. Take a listen.
It's safe and no suspect. I'm just confused about what's going on.
What happened so close to campus? There's so many people here that could be potential victims.
I'm comfortable coming to school, like I have class today and stuff. So that's a little bit unsettling.
And so those are the questions that police are hopefully going to be answering in the next hour when we hear that press conference. Hallie?
Can you help us center the victims here? These were all, students in their early 20s here. What else do we know about who they are? We're showing their pictures. Ethan, Kaylee, Zana, Madison.
We know that they were extremely close. In fact, the picture that you showed right off the top, that was taken just hours before they were killed. Kaylee had been friends with Madison Mogen since the 6th grade. The two of them were living with 20-year-old Xana Kernodle. They were all so close with Xana's boyfriend, who was also killed in their home, Ethan Chapin. He was a triplet who his parents say they had just visited. So many lives right now shattered and right before the holiday. Hallie?
Gotti, we'll be keeping an eye out for any updates from you on this story later on tonight. Thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, some news on a story we brought you here on this show more than a year ago. A startup which can make meat products without killing any live animals. They make this stuff using cell culture technology. Well, it's now gotten approval from the FDA. The first time the FDA has ever given a sign-off like this for a company selling lab-grown meat. Now, in order to get this stuff to actual people like you and me, Upside Foods, it still needs to get approval from the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service. Number 2, NASA, you probably caught this, launching Artemis 1, its new mega rocket and space capsule. On a mission to the moon, it blasted off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center overnight. Artemis, now the first step toward getting astronauts back to the moon, coming 50 years after the final Apollo mission. Number 3, more than 1 billion younger folks might be at the risk of losing their hearing, according to a new study published in BMJ Journals. We're talking about folks ages 12 to 35. And it turns out all of us, well, I'm 38, close enough, but people that in that age group actively listen to stuff at 105 decibels. Like, that's what you're listening to. That is 30 decibels more than what you should be listening to. So, like, if you would like to keep your hearing into your older age, experts say use ear protection when it's loud. Keep your devices turned down at a safe volume. It's the stuff you might expect, common sense stuff. Number 4, Congress holding a hearing today to discuss adding a seat for Cherokee Nation delegate in the House of Representatives. Back in 1835, the U.S. government and the Cherokee Nation signed the Treaty of New Echota, which became the legal basis for forcible removal of the Cherokees, known as the Trail of Tears. Article 7 of the treaty says the tribe is entitled to a delegate in the House of Representatives. 187 years later, Cherokees are asking the U.S. to make good on this old promise. Number 5, fair to say most of us know it's Christmas time when we start hearing this young lady singing All I Want for Christmas Is You. And while Mariah Carey might be known as the Queen of Christmas to her fans, the U.S. Trademark Trial and Appeal Board has denied her exclusive legal rights to that title. Her trademark application was contested. Darlene Love, Elizabeth Chan argued they are also Christmas queens. It's beginning to look a lot like a sluggish holiday spending season, with Target today lowering some of its expectations for earnings for retailers' most important time of the year. Can we please just say what this really is, right? In super plain English, these companies are like, hey, we may not make as much of a profit as we thought we were gonna this holiday season. That's coming after profits went down something like 50% this most recent quarter. You've got Target pointing to inflation for a decline in sales, the general sort of economic climate here, with stock down today, 13%. Overall, though, retail sales didn't do so badly in October, ticking up a little bit, 1.3%. Again, plain English, this means people are still spending money, and maybe it means the Fed may keep raising interest rates. NBC's Brian Chung joins us now. Context, Brian, please, right? Like, why should we care what Target is doing? The answer is because it tells us something about what we are all doing on a macro scale as it relates to spending and the economy, right?
Yeah, and what Target's earnings this morning tell us is that what's bad for Target with smaller margins and less profit might be good for Americans when it comes to the prices that you're going to pay this holiday season. The management at Target suggesting they're going to expect, quote, greater markdown pressure, translation, promotions, and sales to try to get inventory out the door. That's for a few reasons. One, because inventory built up so substantially after the large supply chain issues that we saw last year, but then also because demand might be less because inflationary pressures might keep a lot of Americans a little tighter on their wallets this holiday season. A big reason why Target also downgraded their guidance for future profits in the fourth quarter. But the macro story does point to Americans still spending in the month of October. As you mentioned, retail sales up 1.3%. That, by the way, beat Wall Street estimates. Of course, what happens in October doesn't tell us about anything what's going to happen on Black Friday, but it seems like Americans do have the ability to spend, but the overall story remaining the case that inflation is going to cause you to maybe pare back a little bit this season.
In other breaking news, Black Friday is like a week from Friday. Thanksgiving's already here. How did that happen? Brian Chung, we'll have you back next week because we want to talk about those sales, what we should expect, et cetera. Thank you. When we come back, cold and flu season is already here, right? But health officials are already reporting now a shortage of a key antibiotic. So what are the alternatives if your kids get sick, let's say, and need amoxicillin? We're going to talk about that in the original tonight. Stay with us. A measles outbreak is getting bigger in Ohio, where officials say it first started. We'll have more on that coming up in the local. But first to tonight's original, in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And if you're trying to get your hands on this antibiotic called amoxicillin, really popular, right? You might be having a hard time because the FDA is saying there is a shortage. They're putting almost 24 amoxicillin products in that category because there's more demand for it. And here's why. This is something that's mainly used for stuff like strep throat, right? Ear infections, respiratory infections, bacterial infections. But it's also used to treat secondary infections caused by diseases that are viral. RSV, for example, COVID, the common viral cold. All viral infections that have really surged this fall. Zincle Esimwa has more.
When the doctor came in to give us a diagnosis, she said, just so you know, there is an amoxicillin shortage.
There's a major drug shortage, alarming providers and parents like Stacy Ritchie.
I went straight to my normal pharmacy. They were out. Headed to the second pharmacy. They were out.
Today, amoxicillin, one of the most commonly used antibiotics, is hard to find. The Food and Drug Administration issuing a notice about a shortage of the drug. The American Society of Health System Pharmacists saying 3 major amoxicillin manufacturers are reporting shortages on products, including chewable tablets, capsules and powder, or suspension drugs, typically prescribed to children. Stacy is a parent of 3 kids in Kansas City, Missouri. Her daughter, Sophia Ritchie, diagnosed with strep throat.
I would have drove to another state to get the amoxicillin if I absolutely had to.
How did that feel as a parent to be worried about whether or not you could provide medicine to your child?
It was scary.
Hugh Chansey, a pharmacist and owner of Chansey Drugs, runs 6 pharmacies in southern Georgia.
Not having amoxicillin this time of year is a big deal. You're around holidays and children are getting sick.
He and other pharmacists began flagging shortages back in October.
We can only get 3 bottles a day.
How many bottles a day do you typically get when there's not a shortage?
Well, normally it would be unlimited. We could get whatever we needed.
In a prior statement to NBC, the FDA said that they're aware of some intermittent supply interruptions of amoxicillin products in the U.S. and that there are a number of factors that can cause or contribute to drug shortages that are out of the FDA's control. As for the 3 major amoxicillin manufacturers, in a statement to NBC, UK pharmaceutical company Hickman said, in part, "We understand the importance of this medication and are looking at ways to increase production."
I'm really praying that my children don't get sick again while we have this shortage.
Zincle is joining us now. And Zincle, you know, the big question people probably have is like, okay, so when's this shortage going to get better? The FDA has not said. So what are the alternatives for patients if they're talking to their doctors about this? What's the other option here?
Yeah, Hallie, that's the big question. And there are alternatives to amoxicillin. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce those names of those medicines. But if you are in need of that medication, you should ask your doctor. And remember that if the issue is not bacterial, antibiotics will likely not be needed. So that's significant. But still, as we heard from that pharmacist, right now in this cold, flu, RSV, just general sick season, the need is high, Hallie.
You talked about how pharmacists flagged this in October. It is, mid-November. Is there concern that the FDA should have acted sooner, or is this considered an appropriate timeline for something on this scale?
Yeah, so the pharmacist I talked to, who runs 6 pharmacies in southern Georgia, says he was flagging this as far as 6 weeks back, and he's attributing it to supply chain issues. We've talked about supply chain issues in a lot of different sectors, and medicine and healthcare is no different. Of course, that's a larger systemic issue, so it will take time to resolve that. But in the short term, a lot of parents are taking matters into their own hands, visiting pharmacies, and hoping for change. Hallie?
Zincle Esimwa, thank you very much for that reporting. Tomorrow, we're going to meet a mom who struggled having a premature baby during COVID. I want you to listen to a little bit of her story.
I just felt like the unluckiest person in the world. It was just, sometimes I didn't know how I was even going to get through.
She's part of a bigger study about women's pregnancy experiences during COVID and new research showing that more premature babies were born. In the original tomorrow, new technology that's trying to help moms have healthier pregnancies. We'll have that story for you. Coming up here tonight, it may just be mid-November, but for millions of Americans, it is already feeling like the absolute dead of winter outside. And where do you hear what's headed for Buffalo? Plus, a little bit of a buzzkill from the happiest place on earth because it's getting even more expensive. How much more you can expect to shell out for your next Disney trip next. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, a bus of migrants arriving in Philadelphia today from Texas. You can see it here. Officials say a 10-year-old girl who arrived was hospitalized for dehydration. This is Philly's first bus of migrants from Texas, where the governor there has been sending migrants to cities over the past few months. Philly's mayor says they are a proud and welcoming city. From our Midwest Bureau, Columbus's public health agency, is investigating a measles outbreak in that area. 18 cases at 7 child care facilities and 1 school. The health department is trying to do some contact tracing here. All the people who were infected were not vaccinated, they say. With the health department pointing out vaccination is the best way to prevent measles. From our Southeast Bureau, if Disney World tickets are on your Christmas list, they're going to cost Santa a little bit more this year because starting December 8th, Disney will be raising ticket prices with specific numbers for each park on the one-day, one-park ticket. This is the first time that all 4 Disney World parks will be priced differently. Magic Kingdom is the most expensive because it is super-duper popular. Over the next few days, spots all around the country are forecast to break record low temperatures. And yes, listen, can we just be like, it is winter. It's going to be cold, folks. It's November. I know you do not turn on the news to hear me tell you that. Like, I know that, right? But this is record-breaking stuff because think about it. First half of this month, record warm temperatures. Now it's looking to be totally flipped. This is why this is news here. Check out the video we're getting out of Michigan. Some streets are already totally covered in snow. Similar deal over in Massachusetts with early this morning, their first snow of the season. And it's not like this winter weather is going anywhere for a while. Guess what Buffalo is going to get? Maybe up to 3 feet of snow by Saturday. Bill Cairns joins me now. And I'm going to be real level with you, Bill, because this is our first time doing this winter. Like, it's my least favorite thing to be like, it's winter, it's cold, back to you. Like, I know. But the reason why this is so interesting to us tonight is because of what we talked about. Record warm, flipping to record lows really early. Like, this is a big thing.
We have the right to complain. I mean, we're all okay with gradual change, but when it's like really, jarring, we don't like it. I mean, this extreme cold, comes on the heels in some areas of the warmest start to November we've ever seen. I mean, we had the New York City Marathon in 75 degrees in New York only like 10 days ago. So, yes, this is jarring. Right now, Fargo, wind chills down to 4 degrees. I mean, this is kind of typical of what you'd expect in January, February. So this isn't just, it's cold out there. Tomorrow morning,
It's early cold too, Bill.
I mean, negative wind chills tomorrow in Bismarck. You're going to send the kids to school and you're going to head into the car tomorrow. Temperatures are going to be in the 20s, wind chills in the teens through the Ohio Valley. And then as we go through the weekend, it stays cold too. Usually, and that's one thing, Hallie, in November, you get a couple cold days, but then usually it warms up. This is here to stay.
Can I ask you a question? Is it true or is it an old wives' tale that, like, when it's really warm and then really cold, it can make you more susceptible to getting sick?
I don't know if there's any medical doctor that would tell you that, but there's a lot of people that express that and say that.
I'm totally putting you on the spot. I know you are.
I've never seen any
meteorologist Bill Cairns, and I'm Dr. Bill Cairns.
I've never seen any medical studies or weather studies linking the two, that it's actually a medical thing. But
yeah, just curious, because you look at what's happening, right? Lake effect snow, we're going to see into the weekend, et cetera. Like, this isn't really going anywhere.
And this is going to be wild, too. The pictures that you're going to see out of Buffalo, you say Buffalo, it's snow, they can deal with it. You have to remember, they got 4 to 5 feet of snow about 6 years ago, and it was a state of emergency. Cars were stranded on highways, being rescued by the National Guard. That's the type of scenario we could be looking at because the lakes are very warm. I just told you how cold it's going to be, and the snow forecast is pretty epic, even by Buffalo standards. From now until Saturday morning, the forecast was 36 inches, and now they've upped it to 36 to 48 inches. So that's 3 feet. That's 4 feet of snow. And this isn't just like the snow towns south of Buffalo where they typically get hit. They're calling for this 36 to 48 inches of snow in downtown Buffalo by Saturday. They have an NFL football game that's supposed to be played. And now Orchard Park is located just south of Buffalo. And so, yeah, they're going to have to shovel out the stadium. Who knows? And maybe they may won't even be able to play that game on Sunday in Buffalo. So that's a story to watch, too.
I'm shivering just listening to you. Bill Cairns, thank you very much. Appreciate it, friend. Still to come. Our backstory tonight is all about the guy who picks out the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. You know it's our behind-the-scenes look, so we're going behind the scenes with him on how he does it and how he even got this job in the first place. It's coming up. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And in just 2 weeks from today, we will see the world-famous Rockefeller Christmas tree lit up in New York City, just steps away from our world news headquarters at NBC News. And check it out. This was this morning. 900-pound Swarovski star covered in 3 million crystals put on top of the tree. Now they just got to get 50,000 lights onto it. No biggie. This tradition has been around for decades, and somebody's got to be in charge of it, right? That man is Eric Posey. He's the head gardener for Rockefeller Center, which means he's not just in charge of the Christmas tree every year, but also of every single plant in and around Rockefeller Center. FYI, like 75,000 of them. He has taken a quick break from his very busy job to join us now. Eric, it's great to have you on the show. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
So you had a hand in picking out this year's tree, which came from Queensbury, New York. I want to show people on the screen where the other trees have come from over the past 5 years, in the Northeast, of course. Take us behind the scenes, Eric, because that's what this segment is all about. What's the backstory to picking out a good tree? How do you get it to Rockefeller? What are you looking for, Eric, when you do this?
Well, I'm looking for the perfect tree. I'm looking for a great tree that you would want to put in your living room. And that's what this tree is. It's a big, beautiful Norway spruce. It's 82 feet tall and 50 feet wide.
God bless you, Eric. I'm not putting an 82-foot tree in my living room, sir. That's never happening, right?
Mine
Are you
neither.
out there? Are you like out there touching them and like? You're physically involved in this, right? Like you're into it.
Yeah. So over the course of the summer, you water it, you feed it, you climb it, and make sure everything's all right. And then you got to make all the arrangements to bring it to 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
And there are plenty of arrangements, as we will find out when the tree is lit. You've been working at Rock Center since 1988 when you were in college. Did you always look at the rink, look at the tree, and go, "That's it. That's my next job. That's what I want to do"?
I don't know if that was it, but yeah, I kind of grew into the job, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a great time all year. It takes all year to find the right tree.
Do you feel like any stress about it at all? I mean, you don't seem like a guy who folds under pressure, my friend. Like you know, but.
Well, it's not so much stress or pressure. It's just that you want to do a good job. You want to make everybody proud. You want everybody to come here and put a smile on their face.
What does it mean to you then? Like, to see the tourists. And I want to show people, we kind of laughed we laughed a lot showing this live shot of the Christmas tree because we thought, well, show people the Christmas tree. Well, guess what? It is pitch dark in New York, obviously. The tree is not lit up. That's not going to happen for 2 more weeks. But people from all over the world will come to see this thing. Do you ever talk to these tourists who come in from out of town, who come in just to see this tree that you picked out?
Yeah, it's great. You hear stories about when they came around with their mom and dads or their grandmas or grandpas, and now they're bringing their kids around, and they come from overseas and they ask questions, and it's a lot of fun. It's interesting to find out what they're doing.
Let me ask you a very backstory question, which is there anything that surprised you, Eric, in your long career handling the tree in Rockefeller Center and being the head gardener there that you sort of didn't expect would happen that you ended up really loving?
Well, I really like being the head gardener. It's a lot of fun. I meet a lot of great people, and with the trees, it's great because over the course of the years that I've been doing it, I've stayed friends with a lot of them. So it's a lot of fun.
You've stayed friends with the trees?
Well, of course with the trees, but with the tree families as well.
I love that because the trees go to families.
Yes, well, the tree goes to Habitat for Humanity when we're done, but I still talk to some of the families from a couple years back and keep in touch with them.
I love that. Eric, it is so cool to meet the man behind the magic. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us a little glimpse at what the work is like. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can we get psyched? It's almost the holiday seasons. Eric is here to walk us through it. We're going to end on that note. Happy Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow. Look at that tree. You can't even see it, but you know it's there. Just like us when we're off the air. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.